There's a reason flash storage isn't called electronic non-volatile memory storage. IBM Flash Storage is fast, cloud-ready, scalable and surprisingly affordable. Order by the 30th of June and pay nothing for 90 days. Find out more at ibm.biz/flash offer.
I'm Adam Shepherd.
And I'm Jane McCallion.
And you're listening to the ITPro Podcast. And it's a very exciting time for us right now because we are just days away from the opening of ITPro Live.
Yes, our first virtual conference kicks off on Monday afternoon. We have a really good lineup of guests, some of whom, such as Caroline Carruthers and Stu Peck, who you have already heard of on this podcast, but also others who you won't have. What are you looking forward to best, Adam?
Well, it's tough because it is a really, really solid lineup. My personal highlight that I think I'm looking forward to the most is probably the session from Jeffrey Frederick and Douglas Squirrel, which is on enhancing your organizational culture through using agile methodology in conversations and general kind of cultural management type stuff, which is a really interesting concept.
I've got to say, I'm really looking forward to the two sessions that I'm hosting. The first is on Monday afternoon with Rebecca George, OBE, and then a panel session on Wednesday on why does everybody hate security, which is the kind of question that I just love, and we've got a really good lineup for that as well. But it just looks like an interesting week. We've got different topics for each day, so there's something for everyone, no matter kind of what area of IT you come from, really.
It's free to register and all the sessions will be available on demand after their broadcast. So if you can't catch the live version, you can always catch up at your leisure. If you haven't subscribed already, you can do that via the link that we will put in the show notes for this episode.
Coming up later in the show, we'll be talking about 5G, the good, the bad, and the conspiracies. But first, this week's top news.
Our first news story this week is something that will come as a relief to many listeners, and that is the fact that Windows apps are finally coming to Chromebooks.
So yes, this is coming via Parallels Desktop, which will be integrated into Chrome OS, and Windows apps will run natively via virtualization rather than being streamed VDI style, so that's a big improvement in user experience.
It also means that Chrome OS users won't be lumbered with using the Android equivalents of popular Windows apps, which is fine for some kind of fairly basic applications, but for the more meaty stuff, you really want the native desktop version if possible.
Yes, I mean, light versions are always a bit kind of...
Well, a bit light.
Yeah, they're a bit like... you get maple syrup and you get maple flavoured condiment, and they're the maple flavoured condiment of apps. So does this make Chrome OS the perfect enterprise platform now? Because I've got to be honest with you, I actually thought this had already happened. When I saw the news come up, I had to double check.
No, so there's been similar-ish solutions for Chrome OS for a while. Chrome OS got the ability to run Linux apps a while ago, which is, a step in this direction in terms of being able to run fully fledged native desktop programs. But there's a lot of stuff that, just doesn't work on Linux for a variety of reasons. Most notably, the Microsoft Office suite has never worked properly on Chrome OS. There's the web app versions, there's the Android versions, but neither of those really are as fully featured as the proper full-fat Windows versions for kind of obvious reasons. But beyond stuff like that, the really important thing that this unlocks is it enables organizations to use the legacy apps, the custom apps, the internal apps that they may have floating around their estate that they still, need to use and haven't phased out yet. But this means that they can use those applications while still having all of the portability, manageability, and really good security that Chromebooks offer.
I mean, yeah, Chromebooks have also always kind of had this cheap and cheerful air about them, but the problem has always been, to an extent, functionality. If you wanted to do just kind of fairly low intensity, slightly basic stuff, then it was fine. But for more intense uses, like you say, sort of like some finance uses, that kind of thing, you really needed Windows. You needed Windows, and that kind of solves this problem. So IT departments can invest in the slightly cheaper hardware while still having all the OS functionality that they need from Windows.
Next up, NatWest has officially taken the first step to replacing passwords with the news that it will be rolling out behavioural authentication tools.
Yes, so behavioural biometrics functions will be rolled out from next year. So this goes a little bit beyond, sort of the standard biometrics like fingerprints or face scanning or whatever. It analyses behaviour and usage patterns to determine whether transactions are legitimate. This is something actually we had a feature go up on this week. It is becoming a growing way of doing authentication, seeing whether the person is who they say they are by their little idiosyncrasies, effectively.
It's something that the security industry in general has been using for a while in terms of behavioral analysis to determine what levels of authentication to apply. And it's really interesting to see it come to, fintech and the financial sector. It's being rolled out ahead of the enforcement of the strong customer authentication regulations, which will be coming into force next year, I believe.
Yes, and notably Microsoft has been campaigning for the death of passwords. So is this the first step in that direction, or is it just another boondoggle?
I think it is a step. I think this is the first real kind of mass implementation of this kind of technology. And while we won't see passwords going away anytime soon, I think we are on the way to, if not replacing passwords, then at the very least making passwords just one aspect of a number of different authentication methods. I mean, biometrics, proper biometrics like iris scanning, fingerprint scanning, facial recognition in some cases have been becoming more prevalent over the last couple of years, thanks largely to their implementation in things like smartphones and laptops. But we're still a while off that technology being a mainstream authentication method for most organizations, I think.
I mean, it's also probably worth mentioning that analytics is nothing new when it comes to detecting fraud and that kind of thing. Pattern recognition has been used so that if, for example, you've done a bunch of shopping or you're just doing a normal thing in the UK and then suddenly you're trying to buy a car in Taiwan, it will flag it as a potential problem and normally block the transaction until you're able to confirm that it's for real. So to my mind, it kind of builds on that a little bit.
Yeah, it seems like a fairly natural evolution of that kind of thing. The technology was developed in partnership with Visa and will be rolling out to customers next year, although how long the rollout will take is not currently specified.
And finally, it's been revealed that it was the CIA's own poor security practices that led to the leak of devastating cyber weapons 3 years ago.
This is the notorious Vault 7 leak back in 2017, which contained a variety of tools and exploits designed to allow the CIA to covertly hack into pretty much any platform and any user that they cared to.
These were developed by the internal cyber warfare division called the Centre for Cyber Intelligence. And according to an internal report, this division's basic security practices were so woefully lax, in quotes, that they may never have known the tools had been stolen if they weren't publicly shared, which is quite something.
We always assume that the intelligence agencies in general must have the most top-notch security and the best of the best practices, but apparently not. Users were sharing kind of systems administrator level passwords between themselves. There were no effective controls on removable media, and historical data was available to users pretty much indefinitely, all of which is not good practice for your average IT department, let alone a division developing dangerous cyber weapons.
Yeah, I think it can probably be described as worst practice, in fact. Now, this report was introduced as evidence in the trial of Joshua Schultz, who was a former operative accused of stealing the tools for WikiLeaks. But it reminds me of the phrase, the best form of attack is defence. And it seems rather that the CIA read it to be the other way around. It kind of went, just attack, 100% attack, and I'm sure the defence will be fine. Maybe it's a bit like hubris as well, actually.
I think there's an element of that, but also I think it's just that this division seems like a bunch of nerds getting excited about building cool cyber weapons, and basic security practices are kind of boring compared to developing exploits and stuff, which is why the security basics are so often overlooked, as we've covered a number of times on this very show. But I mean, if you look at the names of the tools that were included in the Vault 7 leak, again, as we've touched on in previous episodes, they're just so dorky, the names that they give these tools. It's all, it's all stuff like, Shadow Ewok and Cyber Dragon and, Bouncing Hippo and all just ridiculous nonsense.
Cringingly embarrassing.
Yeah,
Cringingly embarrassing. And I'm sure actually quite a lot of the developers, once their nerdery is in the open, are probably cringing as well, alongside the whole embarrassment of having been robbed of your cyber weapons. I'm holding off a house analogy here, by the way.
Yeah, I can feel you restraining yourself.
It is a house analogy. No.
But as with so many other stories that come up on this podcast, it is simply a demonstration that even the so-called best in the business are not immune from breaches, leaks, and fundamental lapses in basic security. So keep yourselves safe, people. Well, that's all for part one. After the break, we'll be talking to Paul Beastall, advisory board member of trade body UK 5G, about the development of 5G, the potential benefits, and the persistent conspiracy theories that have been plaguing it.
See you after the break.
The IBM Flash storage solution can be broken down into 3 S's. Speed, retrieve data fast and efficiently. Scalability, grow your storage as your business grows. Simplicity, easily migrate and integrate with existing systems. Oh, and there's a 4th. It's surprisingly affordable, with a recommended monthly price from as little as 1,300 kroner. Order by the 30th of June and pay nothing for 90 days. Visit ibm.biz/flash offer now.
Welcome back. After many years of hype and speculation about standards and capabilities, 5G is finally here. 5G-capable phones from the likes of Samsung, Huawei and Xiaomi are finally available to UK customers, and 5G networks are, slowly but surely, becoming available across the country. But there's a darker side to this technology, with some campaigners saying it's damaging people's health and arson attacks on telephone masts. To discuss all of this and more, we're joined by Paul Beastall, advisory board member of the trade body UK 5G. Paul, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So, Paul, before we dive in, I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at UK 5G.
Yeah, sure. So, UK 5G is a body that is supporting the Department for Digital's 5G testbeds and trials program, which has currently invested about £150 million into 5G developments in the UK. I sit on the advisory board of UK 5G, which is bringing together people from across industry to help steer the programme, advise government and represent industry. And I also chair the testbeds and trials working group.
So, Paul, as an expert, before we dive into the complexities of where 5G might be going in the future, it might be helpful to take a quick look back. So what's the difference, technically speaking, between 5G and 4G?
So I think there's 2 things we need to think about with that. The first thing is, like any new cellular technology, there's new radio technology, new radio techniques that allow us to get more bandwidth out of radio spectrum. and also allow us to access more radio spectrum, which allows us to deliver new services and, of course, generates possibilities of new entrants in the market. But there's also changes at the network layer as well. So the networks are getting a lot more integrated with the radios. Compute is being deployed into the network, which means it can open up a whole raft of new services when that technology is actually rolled out.
So, theoretically speaking, what kind of practical benefits does this give 5G networks over their earlier 4G counterparts?
I think there are two main things. The first one is faster speeds and a lower cost of delivery. So it means that the mobile operators can meet our insatiable demand for broadband in a cost-effective way. The other thing is by putting compute capability out in the network, we can get very low latency, so very low delays across the network, which can open up new services where machines and humans can interact seamlessly with latencies down at the millisecond level. So that should help us with things like wireless augmented reality without feeling sick, and potentially machines in safety critical cases where they can interact with humans. And connected autonomous vehicles is a key use case that the 5G industry is targeting as well.
So I think it's probably worth addressing slightly the elephant in the room. For those people who don't really pay attention to smartphone launches that much, there is every possibility that they're coming across 5G for the first time in the context of conspiracy theories that have popped up right now, whether that's with regard to radiation, which is a long-standing one when it comes to mobile technology, or fears about it somehow being related to COVID. So can we address some of those fears briefly here?
Yeah, sure. I think the COVID one is really easy. There is zero evidence of any link between COVID and any sort of electromagnetic spectrum. One is a virus and the other one is an electromagnetic wave. And it's actually led Ofcom to publish probably the strongest piece of work I've ever seen from them as a public body, titled Clearing Up the Myths Around 5G and the Coronavirus. So even the telecom regulators pushed back in a very robust manner. The Ofcom release states there is a conspiracy theory that claims 5G is connected to the spread of the coronavirus. This is wrong. There is no scientific basis or credible evidence for these claims.
That's fairly unequivocal.
Absolutely.
One of the other conspiracy theories that we've seen pop up fairly persistently, even pre-COVID, is that the radiation from 5G is more harmful than other types of radiation and other telco standards like 4G and 3G. What's the concern here around the potential effects of 5G? What are people getting so upset about?
I have to say I'm not really sure. I think a lot of it's driven by the fact that it's new, and new is always something that can make people fearful. Again, in the same report, Ofcom talk about some of the field strength measurements they've made around deployed 5G base stations here in the UK, and how 5G signals are no more than 1% of the strength limit that's driven by international guidelines. So I think there is a view that, obviously very high levels of radiation, of electromagnetic radiation can cause effects in things. Microwave ovens work in that way, but they're a very closed space with a very, very large amount of power. And I think sometimes there's just a confusion between the level of power and the effect that it has.
Yeah, I mean, this is my personal opinion, but the word radiation, post sort of Cold War does carry a lot of weight, and there's sometimes a misunderstanding of what kind of a broad term that is, if you'll excuse the slight pun in that. But yeah, it's a theoretically scary word, but when you look into it, there isn't really that much to be, or anything to be scared about for the vast majority of the time.
Absolutely. And I think actually one of the positives coming out of all the profile that the concerns around COVID and 5G have raised is actually much better communication about what 5G is and what the issues are, and they're being, like the Ofcom report, they're being challenged by some strong evidence from some well-informed bodies. I think the flip side that we do just need to touch on, of course, is the very unfortunate damage to 5G infrastructure, with people setting masts on fire and various activities like that, when these are services that are used quite often for things like telemetry from ambulances and various other things like that. So, actually there is a strong body of evidence that actually damaging cellular infrastructure can cause more than financial harm.
Well, in a couple of cases, it wasn't even 5G masts that were torched. It was actually 4G masts that hadn't been, linked to the 5G network at all.
Absolutely. 5G rollout is still ongoing. Less than half the masts in the UK are currently enabled for the operators that we have. The vast majority of masts are not currently transmitting 5G.
Well, that actually brings us rather neatly onto another element of 5G, which is that it's long been heralded as a transformational technology, which is going to enable things like smart cities and autonomous cars and, gigabit mobile download speeds for everyone. A lot of those benefits have yet to fully materialize, I think, for most people. Why hasn't it yet been delivering the kind of transformational benefits that vendors have been promising?
I think there's a number of issues there that kind of all come together. The first one is actually that the base stations require new infrastructure. So 5G runs in new frequency bands. So that means every base station that is to be upgraded needs to be visited, which is obviously time consuming and relatively expensive. And the early adoption has actually been pushed by the consumers, so driven by smartphones and faster broadband. You need to get a certain level of coverage, which is probably very high if you want to start thinking about things like connected and autonomous vehicles. So that, by definition, will follow later. I think the other thing, and we've seen this in 4G, is it's not a G is not a point in time. It's a series of evolutions. So 4G networks today are far more sophisticated than the 4G networks that launched around about 8 years ago. And the early 5G networks will evolve and add new capability and new facilities as they in turn are evolved as the standard develops further.
So, Paul, where is the future of 5G and where is the future value of 5G? Is it in consumer devices, or is it, as a lot of companies, most recently HPE, are saying, smart cities, industrial settings, connected vehicles and that kind of area?
I think the early work will be in consumer. That's getting the early pull. The challenge we've got in the industry is, this is a multi-billion pound investment to upgrade these networks, and it's very hard to get any further incremental revenue from consumers. Consumers now have the split where they pay for the services that they value separately to the connectivity. So the industry is looking for new sources of revenue, and I think they have to come from new applications. So 4G was the technology that made mobile broadband widespread. 5G has to be the technology that connects machines to the internet and allows us to do new things and release new value, or the operators will struggle to make the business case fly. So if we think about it from a UK 5G perspective, a lot of the work that DCMS, the Department for Digital, has been focusing on funding trials for has been on those new use cases. So things that need 5G to happen. So that's things like factory automation, autonomous vehicles, but even things like remote agriculture as well, and how you can improve farming efficiency through better connectivity.
Oh, well, some of those sound really interesting. So are there any use cases in particular that you've seen that are, kind of quite snazzy, if you like?
Yeah, in terms of impact, the most impressive demo I've seen is at the Millbrook Proving Ground in Bedfordshire, which is the kind of automotive test centre for the UK, where I've seen a McLaren sports car doing 150 miles an hour while streaming 1.8 gigabits per second from high resolution cameras on each corner of the car. So that's a kind of an art of the possible. In terms of social impact, one of my favourite cases I've seen was actually a trial in Liverpool, which had a health and social care focus, where they used wireless VR headsets to basically allow people in hospice care to have an experience of walking through a wood or walking on the beach when they were bedridden. And they've actually found it makes people calmer and happier as they approach the inevitable end of their life. And I think for me, it's some of those applications where the wireless isn't necessary. You could do it with a cable, but actually in a clinical setting, being able to do it without disrupting all the other apparatus that's going around and giving people quality of life is one of the things that motivates me to think this is going to be a big step forward.
So, Paul, regular listeners will know that a particular hobby horse of mine is rural broadband and rural connectivity. Does 5G offer any sort of benefits in this area, which has been a bit left behind, both by mobile networks and by kind of broadband physical infrastructure as well?
I think from a mobile infrastructure point of view, probably not. We're likely to see the same infrastructure upgraded. I certainly think there are cases where serving very low density isolated homes is going to be a lot more cost effective over a wireless solution than a wired solution. So I hope it will help. The recent UK 5G backed trials are focusing on rural applications and on the rural economy. So it is an area that government is very keen to see what we can do to make a difference.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for this week, but I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time to chat with us, Paul. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Okay, thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Next week, to coincide with ITPro Live, we'll be bringing you a series of bonus episodes. Every morning, you'll get a 10-minute preview of what will be happening that day. And of course, we'll still be bringing you your regular episode on Friday.
Remember, we'll be leaving sign-up links to ITPro Live in the description for this show notes. Tickets are free and the sessions will be on demand after their broadcast. You'll also find links to everything we've talked about today in the show notes, as well as sign-up links for our newsletter and ITPro 2020, our digital magazine.
You can also follow us on Twitter, where we are at ITPro, as well as on Facebook and LinkedIn. Don't forget to subscribe to the ITPro podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever else you find podcasts to never miss an episode. And we'll be back next week with all our bonus episodes and your normal episode. And until then, goodbye.
Bye.
The ITPro Podcast is brought to you by the Dennis Podcast Network.
There's a reason flash storage is called flash storage and not electronic non-volatile computer memory storage. From quick and efficient data retrieval to instant scalability, everything about IBM flash storage is fast. It's also cloud-ready and surprisingly affordable, with a recommended monthly price of 2,200 kroner for 24 terabytes of all flash. Order by the 30th of June and pay nothing for 90 days. Find out more at ibm.biz/flash offer.